My mom deceived my company to get me fired because my brother was jealous. Have you ever had your own mother try to destroy your entire career just because your success made her favorite golden child feel insecure? When my parents realized they couldn't force me to shrink myself to protect my deadbeat younger brother's fragile ego, my mother crossed a line that shattered our family forever. I'm a 28-year-old guy working as a senior financial analyst for a mid-sized pharmaceutical company. Look, it's not some glamorous Wall Street movie lifestyle, but I worked my absolute tail off to get here. I started at the very bottom as a junior analyst straight out of college, grinding through 60-hour weeks. Then there's my younger brother, Nathan. He's 25, and honestly, the most impressive thing I can say about him is that he consumes oxygen. To really understand how we got to this point, you have to know what growing up in my house was like. I was the oldest. From the time I could walk, I was expected to be the responsible, mature little adult who basically raised himself. Nathan, on the other hand, was the golden child, the baby, the chosen one who could do no wrong, even when he was actively setting things on fire. If I left a single toy on the living room rug as a kid, I'd get grounded. Nathan could literally trash the entire house, and my parents would just gaze at him, smile, and say he was expressing his creativity. I had a strict chore list starting at 7 years old. Nathan didn't wash a single dish until he was 15. Birthdays were an absolute joke. For my 14th birthday, my parents bought me a graphing calculator because it was on my mandatory school supplies list. For Nathan's 12th birthday, they bought him a brand new dirt bike. Every milestone was like that. For me, it was practical clothes, school supplies, or silence. For Nathan, it was gaming consoles, designer sneakers, and concert tickets. Early on, I realized that complaining would get me nowhere. If I wanted anything out of life, I had to build it myself. So I put my head down. I studied hard, maintained top grades, got a part-time job the second I turned 16, and saved every nickel. When I turned 18, the financial support from my parents completely dried up. Not a penny for college, not a dime for my first apartment security deposit. Nothing. Meanwhile, when Nathan turned 18, my parents paid his full college tuition up front, bought him a reliable car, and covered his rent. I ended up going to a solid state school on a partial academic scholarship that I earned myself. I worked 20 hours a week waiting tables and doing data entry, graduated in 4 years with a 3.7 GPA in finance, and walked across the stage exhausted but proud. Nathan went to college 3 years later. My parents financed all of it. He changed his major 4 different times, took 6 years to stumble out with a communications degree, and finished with a 2.3 GPA. For Nathan's graduation, my parents threw a massive catered party with over 100 guests. For mine, they took me to Olive Garden and complained about the price of the appetizers. After graduation, I landed my first job as a junior analyst making $42,000 a year. I lived in a cramped, drafty studio apartment, drove a beat-up Honda Civic with a dented fender, and lived off cheap groceries so I could build an emergency fund. Nathan, meanwhile, bounced between random retail gigs, quitting whenever he got bored, living rent-free at our parents' house, and driving the car they paid for. I kept pushing. I came in early, stayed late, volunteered for the brutal projects nobody else wanted, and after 2 years, I got promoted to analyst. 3 years after that, I made senior analyst. My salary jumped to $78,000. For the first time in my life, I could breathe. I moved into a nice 2-bedroom apartment in a complex with a gym and a pool. I bought myself a reliable, 3-year-old Mazda sedan with working air conditioning and Bluetooth. It wasn't flashy, but I was finally living like an independent adult instead of a broke kid surviving on adrenaline. Nathan was 24 by then, still living in his childhood bedroom, working maybe 15 hours a week at a local sporting goods store, pulling in around $15,000 a year. My parents didn't charge him a single cent for rent, food, or insurance. They were actively bankrolling a grown man who spent his days playing video games and smoking weed with his friends. Last year, at 27, I bought my first home. It was a modest, 3-bedroom, ranch-style house in a safe suburb about 20 minutes from my office. It needed some paint and minor cosmetic love, but it was solid. I saved every dollar for that down payment on my own, secured the mortgage, and handled the entire closing process without asking for a dime. It was the biggest milestone of my life. When I sat down with my parents and told them I had officially closed on a house, their reaction was like ice water. My mom just looked up from her phone and said, "Oh, that's nice, honey." She sounded like I'd just told her I bought a new pack of socks. My dad immediately asked, "Are you sure you didn't overextend yourself? Can you actually handle that mortgage payment?" Zero congratulations. Zero smiles. Zero pride. What really gutted me was what happened 2 days later. Nathan casually mentioned at breakfast that he was thinking about maybe looking at apartments sometime next year. My parents instantly jumped over the table with excitement. They offered to pay his security deposit, co-sign the lease, and subsidize his monthly rent. He hadn't even opened an apartment listing, and they were already writing checks in their minds. The real breaking point happened 3 months ago during our mandatory monthly family dinner. We do these at my parents' house, and usually they're dull and emotionally draining. I eat my food, keep my answers short, and leave the second it's socially acceptable. At this particular dinner, my Uncle Richard and Aunt Paula were visiting. Richard is a straight shooter, and out of nowhere he asked how things were going at work. I casually mentioned that I had just received a merit raise and was now making $92,000 a year. I wasn't bragging. I was literally answering his direct question. Uncle Richard was genuinely impressed. He started asking about the company, the industry, and what kind of projects I was managing. I told him about a process optimization project I'd spearheaded that ended up saving the company significant overhead, and mentioned that management was considering me for an open finance manager role the following year. While Richard and I were talking, I noticed Nathan sitting across the table, looking like someone had just spit in his food. He slumped in his chair, pushed his dinner around his plate, and aggressively stared at his phone. Every few seconds, my mom would shoot me these cold, venomous glares, as if I were committing a crime simply by speaking to my uncle. Once dinner wrapped up, Richard and Paula headed out. I was in the kitchen helping clear dishes when my mom walked up, tapped my shoulder with a rigid finger, and said, "We need to talk in the living room. Now." My stomach tightened. I followed her in, while my dad and Nathan stayed behind in the kitchen. "Sure, what's going on?" I asked. Mom sat down on the couch, folded her hands tightly in her lap, and gave me a look of deep disappointment, as if she were about to deliver a tragic diagnosis. "I need you to understand something," she said, her voice dripping with artificial solemnity. "The way you carried on about your job tonight was completely unacceptable. You made Nathan feel terrible about himself." I actually let out a short, confused laugh. "Wait, are you serious?" "Yes, I am serious," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "Nathan is going through a very delicate transition right now, trying to find his footing and figure out his career path. He does not need to sit here and listen to you boast about your salary and your promotions. It highlights his struggles and makes him feel inadequate." I stared at her in total disbelief. "Mom, Uncle Richard asked me directly how work was going." I answered him. "I didn't boast. I talked about my life." "You could have shown some modesty," she countered. "You didn't need to list your salary or talk about running projects. You know how sensitive your brother is right now." "Nathan isn't struggling with a career path, Mom," I said, struggling to keep my temper in check. "He works 15 hours a week at a retail shop, pays 0 bills, and plays video games all night. That is his choice. It has nothing to do with me." "That attitude right there's the problem," she said, her voice rising. "You are completely insensitive. Not everyone is ruthless and career-obsessed like you. Some people take longer to bloom. You need to tone it down when you come into this house. Stop flaunting your success. Tone it down." My voice shook with anger. "You want me to lie? What should I do next time?" "Tell Uncle Richard the first work part-time at a gas station so Nathan feels better about doing nothing with his life." "Don't be dramatic," she hissed. "I am simply asking you, as his older brother, to show some humility and discretion. You don't need to constantly remind everyone how well you're doing." I mentioned it once because I was asked. I stood up, grabbing my jacket. "I'm not doing this. I'm leaving." "We haven't even had dessert yet," she called out as I walked into the hallway. My dad stepped out of the kitchen, his expression guarded. "Everything okay?" "Fantastic. I said bitterly. Mom just told me I'm too successful and that I need to hide my accomplishments so Nathan's feelings don't get hurt. My dad shifted uncomfortably. I could tell he agreed with her but didn't want to look like the bad guy. Look, your mother is just trying to keep the peace. Maybe you could just be a little less vocal about work, that's all.
Right.
Keep the peace by punishing the kid who actually works, I said. Just then, Nathan walked out of the kitchen, leaning against the doorframe with a smug, satisfied grin. He knew exactly what had just happened, and he loved every second of it. Later, I said to the room and walked out the front door. I sat in my car in their driveway for several minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process the sheer madness of it all. My parents weren't proud of my hard work. To them, my success was an inconvenience, a glaring spotlight on the failure of their golden child. Instead of letting it break me, I channeled that rage straight into my career. Over the next few weeks, I volunteered to lead 2 massive, high-visibility corporate initiatives. I worked late, came in on weekends, built flawless financial models, and polished my presentations until they were bulletproof. A month later, the VP of Finance called me in. The finance manager position had opened up early, and they offered it to me on the spot. My new salary was $112,000 a year. I was ecstatic. Everything I had sacrificed for the last decade was finally paying off. In a moment of naive optimism, I called my parents to share the news. My mom answered.
Hey, Mom.
I've got some really huge news. I just got promoted to finance manager. It comes with a massive raise. There was dead silence on the other end of the line. Mom, that's nice, honey, she said in a completely flat, emotionless tone. Is Dad around? I wanted to tell him too. He's busy in the garage. I'll let him know. Okay, well, I'm really excited. It's a huge step for my career. Well, I have laundry to fold.
Bye.
She hung up before I could even say goodbye. That was her reaction to the biggest achievement of my life. A cold brush-off, followed by a dial tone.
Fine.
I didn't need their approval. I never had it anyway. A few weeks later, my old Mazda lease was up, and with my new income, I treated myself to a brand new Audi sedan. The next family dinner rolled around, and I pulled up to their house in it. Nathan was standing outside in the driveway, and the look of sheer jealousy on his face when I stepped out of that car was worth every penny. Dinner that night was thick with tension. My parents didn't ask a single question about my job, my new title, or my life. But Uncle Richard was there again, and he excitedly asked about the Audi. I told him about the trim and how smoothly it drove. My mother sat across the table, glaring at me like she wanted to set me on fire. As soon as dinner ended, I excused myself. I walked out to my car, but before I could open the door, my mother barged out of the house, crossing her arms, her face flushed with fury. This has to stop, she demanded. What has to stop, Mom? This ridiculous show of arrogance. She pointed aggressively at my Audi. You knew Nathan would see this car. You knew it would make him feel awful about his situation. You could have driven your old car here, but you chose to rub your wealth in his face. I stared at her, completely dumbfounded, before bursting into genuine laughter. Are you seriously telling me I should drive an old beat-up car to dinner just so a 25-year-old grown man doesn't feel bad about working part-time at a sneaker store? Listen to yourself, she shrieked. You have become so arrogant, so cold. You aren't the boy I raised. The boy you raised? I took a step toward her, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Mom, you didn't raise me. You spent all your energy, time, and money spoiling Nathan while I raised myself. I built every single piece of my life with zero help from you. And now that I'm thriving, you want me to hide in the shadows because your golden child has accomplished nothing. How dare you speak to me like that? I'm speaking the truth. Nathan is going nowhere because you and Dad crippled him with enablement. He has no work ethic because you handed him everything on a silver platter. That is your doing, not mine. You used to be humble, she cried, tears of pure anger welling in her eyes. No, Mom, I said coldly, opening my car door. I used to be invisible. There's a difference. I drove off, leaving her standing alone in the driveway. Over the next few weeks, things went completely quiet. I didn't reach out, and neither did they. I threw myself into my new management role, leading a team of 3 analysts, presenting directly to the CFO, and running high-level forecasts. Then, on a random Tuesday morning, everything went completely off the rails. I arrived at the office, and before I could even take off my coat, my director, Glenn, walked over. Glenn was normally an easygoing, friendly guy, but his face was grim. "Come into my office," he said quietly. "Close the door." My heart instantly sank. I sat down across from his desk. "Is everything okay, Glenn?" Glenn leaned back, rubbing his temples with an exhausted sigh. "I got a very bizarre, very concerning phone call yesterday afternoon from a woman claiming to be your mother." I felt the blood completely drain from my face. "What?" "She called the corporate switchboard, had herself transferred through several departments, and finally reached me," Glenn explained. "She told me she was calling out of moral concern about your behavior at the company." I sat frozen, unable to process the words. What could she possibly have said? "She claimed that you've been bragging to family members about taking credit for other people's work," Glenn said, reading from a notepad. "She said you fabricated your achievements to get your promotion, that you've been manipulating data, and that you've been actively creating a hostile, toxic environment for your team. She told me the company was being deceived by you." I felt like I had been kicked in the chest. A wave of nausea washed over me. "Glenn, that is 100% false. Every single project, every presentation, every model I've ever built is documented, logged, and reviewed by you and the team." "I know that," Glenn said gently, putting his hands up. "That's why this call was so completely unhinged. Your team loves working under you. You're one of the highest performers in the building. But the fact that your own mother called your employer to level these kinds of accusations is alarming." "I don't even know what to say," I stammered, my hands shaking with rage and humiliation. "I am so sorry. Look, I told her our records are fully audited and that we have zero concerns about your performance," Glenn said. She got very defensive and implied she might take this higher up to HR or executive leadership. "I'm giving you a heads up because if she tries to contact our HR director, we're going to have to follow corporate protocol." I left his office in a complete daze. My own mother, the woman who brought me into the world, had just called my boss to actively sabotage my career and get me fired, all because my success was an insult to her favorite child. I waited until lunch, walked out to my car, and dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Hi, honey. Did you call my boss?" I cut in, my voice shaking with fury. Silence. "Answer me. Did you call my workplace and tell my director that I'm a fraud and a bully?" "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "Stop lying." I yelled into the phone. "Glenn told me everything. He told me you called trying to get me stripped of my promotion and fired. What is wrong with you?" Her tone instantly flipped from innocent to vicious. "Someone needed to teach you a lesson. You have been absolutely insufferable, parading your money around, acting superior, and making Nathan feel like garbage in his own home. You needed to be brought down a few pegs. By trying to destroy my livelihood?" I screamed. "You made up blatant lies to an executive at a pharmaceutical company. You could have ruined my entire life. If you were actually humble and cared about this family, it wouldn't have come to this," she shrieked back. "I am your mother. I was trying to correct your character." "You're not a mother," I said, cold fury settling deep into my chest. "You're a saboteur. We're done. Do not ever call me again. Do not ever contact my job again. Do not show up at my house. If you ever come near my life again, I will get a restraining order. You are dead to me." "You can't speak to me like that. I hung up. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely lock my phone. Within seconds, my phone began vibrating nonstop. Incoming call from Mom. Declined. Incoming call from Dad. Declined. Incoming call from Mom. Declined. Then the text started flooding in. "Mom, you are being completely hysterical. Pick up the phone right now. Dad, your mother is hysterical and crying. You have no right to treat your parents with such disrespect. Call us. Nathan, dude, What the hell did you say to Mom? She's having a breakdown. I didn't reply to a single word. I blocked all 3 of their numbers, sat back in my seat, and took the first deep breath I'd taken all day. I thought that would be the end of it. But on Monday morning, when I walked into the office, Glenn caught me by the door again. HR director wants to see you, Glenn said quietly. She sent an email on Friday afternoon. My mom, Glenn nodded grimly. 3 pages. Single-spaced. Directly to the head of HR. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I walked into the HR director's office. Lisa, our head of HR, was seated behind her desk with a thick printed document in front of her. Have a seat, Lisa said, her tone surprisingly gentle. Lisa, I am so humiliated, I began, my voice breaking slightly. I know why I'm here, and I promise you. Take a breath, Lisa interrupted kindly. Glenn already briefed me on the situation, but standard procedure requires us to review formal complaints. She turned the 3-page printout toward me. As I read through it, my stomach turned to pure ice. It wasn't just a venting email, it was a calculated hit piece. My mother claimed I had stolen credit for multi-million-dollar cost-saving models. She claimed I had falsified data metrics presented to executive leadership. She claimed I harassed junior analysts and created a hostile work environment. She even ended the letter by stating she was considering contacting legal counsel to report corporate fraud on behalf of the company. Is there a shred of truth to any of this? Lisa asked gently. None of it, I said firmly, looking her dead in the eye. Every single project is documented in our internal drive. You can pull every email, every presentation, and every peer review. You can interview every single analyst under me. Lisa smiled faintly and closed the folder. We already did that over the weekend. We audited your files and reviewed your performance metrics. Everything is spotless. In fact, your team gave you glowing reviews. I slumped back in the chair, the wave of relief making me physically dizzy. So, what happens now? Now, our corporate legal counsel is sending your mother a formal, certified cease and desist letter, Lisa stated firmly. It informs her that an internal investigation found her claims completely fraudulent and that any further contact with this company, its employees, or its leadership will result in immediate civil litigation and criminal harassment charges. That will put an end to this. I walked out of HR feeling exhausted, angry, but deeply protected by my company. That night, my phone buzzed from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Hello. Is this how you're going to act? My dad's voice barked through the speaker. Hiding behind blocked numbers like a coward? Dad, lose this number. Your mother made a mistake, okay? He shouted. She was emotional. She didn't mean what she wrote to your HR department. She wrote 3 single-spaced pages of legal accusations, Dad. I yelled back. That isn't emotional. That is calculated, malicious sabotage. She tried to get me fired and blacklisted from my industry. She feels terrible now. She realizes she went too far. Dad argued, his tone desperate. Are you really going to throw away your entire family over a mistake? Nathan feels like you've completely abandoned him. Nathan is 25 years old, has no job, and sits in your basement playing games. I snapped. I didn't abandon him. I outgrew your toxic circus. If you support a woman who tried to ruin my life, then you are just as guilty. Do not ever call me again. I hung up and immediately blocked the new number. The following Friday, my Uncle Richard called. He had heard the entire story from my dad. I just wanted to call and tell you, Richard said, his voice heavy with disgust, that what your mother did is unforgivable. Paula and I are utterly sickened by it. Your parents have completely lost their minds over this Nathan situation. They're living in total delusion. Hearing someone from my own family validate the reality of the situation brought tears to my eyes. Thanks, Uncle Richard. That means more than you know. You keep your head held high, he told me. You earned everything you have. Don't let them drag you down. Over the next year, my life flourished without the dead weight of my parents' toxicity. At work, my leadership and financial forecasting caught the attention of the executive board. When our division restructured, the VP created a new position specifically for me, senior finance manager, with a new salary of $135,000. I had my own corner office with massive windows, a larger team, and real executive respect. Uncle Richard kept me casually updated on the family circus. Nathan had eventually been fired from his part-time sporting goods job for showing up late 6 shifts in a row. My mother made excuses, claiming the manager had a grudge against him. Eventually, my parents paid to move Nathan into a rental apartment with 2 roommates just so they could claim he was independent. Nathan told extended family he moved out because the family home was too depressing without me there. A few months after my second promotion, a thick envelope arrived in my physical mailbox. It was a 5-page handwritten letter from my mother. I opened it, expecting, or at least hoping for some semblance of remorse. Instead, it was 5 pages of pure manipulation. She wrote about how cruel I was for cutting them off, how much Nathan was suffering without his big brother, and how much pain I had caused the family. Not once did she apologize for calling my boss. Not once did she acknowledge the 3-page hit piece she sent to HR. In fact, the final page concluded with an ultimatum. If I wrote an apology to her for overreacting and promised to be more humble and considerate of Nathan's feelings in the future, she would graciously forgive me and welcome me back into the family. I took a picture of the letter, sent it to Uncle Richard with a caption, "Can you believe this delusion?" and threw the original straight into the paper shredder. 1 year after cutting contact, my cousin on my mother's side got married. Uncle Richard warned me my parents and Nathan would be there. By this time, I was in a serious, loving relationship with an amazing woman, and we decided to attend together. I walked into the church, looking sharp in a tailored suit, my gorgeous girlfriend on my arm. My parents were sitting in the second row, with Nathan slouched between them looking miserable in an ill-fitting suit. When my mother saw me, her jaw dropped, and she started frantically whispering to my dad. I gave them a polite, distant nod and sat on the opposite side of the aisle. At the reception, while I was standing at the bar getting drinks for my girlfriend and me, my mother suddenly appeared beside me. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling with forced vulnerability. I looked at her with complete calm. "There's nothing to talk about. You can't ignore your mother forever," she pressed, stepping closer. "I sent you a letter offering peace. You sent me a letter demanding that I apologize to you for you trying to destroy my career." I replied coldly. "That's not an apology, Mom. That's narcissism." Her face turned bright red, the mask slipping. "I made one mistake. You are tearing this family apart over one incident." "Calling my director was one mistake," I said, counting on my fingers. "Sending a 3-page fraudulent dossier to HR was a second mistake. Refusing to ever apologize is a third. You still believe you were justified in trying to humble me." "You were becoming arrogant," she hissed under her breath. "Someone had to check your ego." "And there it is," I said, picking up our drinks. "You haven't changed. And until you realize how monstrous your actions were, you have no son."
Goodbye, Mom.
I turned my back on her and walked away. From across the room later that night, I saw her sitting at her table, weeping into a napkin while my dad rubbed her back and Nathan stared blankly into his phone. They left the wedding early. The rest of the night was pure joy. It has now been 2 full years since that day. I recently turned 30. 6 months ago, I was promoted again, this time to Director of Finance, pulling in $170,000 a year. I purchased a beautiful, larger home with a huge backyard, upgraded my car, and my girlfriend and I are officially picking out engagement rings. According to Uncle Richard, Nathan is 27 now, still unemployed, and bouncing between low-effort side hustles while my parents continue to pay his rent and credit card bills. When my mother found out through family gossip about my latest promotion to director, Richard told me she broke down in tears. Not tears of joy, tears of bitter frustration that her sabotage failed to stop me. My dad still occasionally has distant relatives send me messages asking me to call him. I ignore every single one. He has never once held my mother accountable, and he never will. Growing up, I thought success was about making my parents proud. It took almost losing everything to realize that toxic people will hate you simply for shining a light on their own shortcomings. Cutting them out wasn't cruel. It was the greatest act of self-preservation of my life.